You are thinking to purchase the Inmotion V11Y, but you are not sure if it's better or not than Inmotion V11. Or maybe you're just thinking to purchase this one as a first wheel, or maybe buying second-hand the Inmotion V11. I have to say to you guys that I have more than 6,000 kilometers on the Inmotion V11, and I have already done 500 with the Inmotion V11Y, and this video is the full comparison between these two and what you can find better on the Inmotion V11Y and which subject the Inmotion V11 continue to be better than this one. So if you want to know that and much more, stay tuned after the intro. Hi everyone, Marcus here from MADpack, and if you love tech and if you love discounts, this is the place for you. And today we are going to put side by side my beloved Inmotion V11Y and my beloved Inmotion V11. But obviously between these two wheels there are 4 years of difference, and obviously this is the new generation of this one. But I'll let you know why you should maybe avoid second-hand Inmotion V11, and obviously which subject the Inmotion V11Y is inferior to the Inmotion V11. When we talk about structure and when we talk about these plastics, I have to say that the Inmotion V11Y is better. And when you look it doesn't look like there is any difference whatsoever. But when you look here to the bottom, for example, the V11 have straight away tendency to come already cracked. This one was completely new when it arrived to my hand and it was already cracked. So that's why here on the bottom I have these bits of basically plastic that I put it to reinforce and to protect more this section of the suspension. In here, no problem whatsoever, so definitely a plus. Also something that they have changed, and I have already referred that, is that this material here is harder, but it doesn't change the fact that it's really super comfortable between your legs. So it's definitely not an advantage in here. And I have to say that the grip tape have tendency to stick more to this type of material than on the Inmotion V11. One thing that I would like to see in other wheels, and in any wheels to be honest, because until today I never saw it, is that companies, when they produce these wheels, they make like a structure where you can fit a new grip tape, and after this structure goes to the corners of the grip tape, so avoiding that the grip tape, when you are trying to take out your pads and moving to another wheels, they will just come off. So something for Inmotion to think, because I'm not expecting that from another brand, because Inmotion normally here's what we have to say. So when we talk about disassembling and assembling these wheels, they are very similar but also very different. So the first thing, you have more screws on the Inmotion V11Y than you have on the Inmotion V11. We are talking about the section in here where you have a piece of plastic that you have to cover the cables that comes from the motherboard and it goes to the batteries, and also for your motor, and in there you have basically 4 screws more in each side, and that's it. All the rest is exactly the same. But when we talk about the space that you have to fit your control board, is not even comparable. So that's definitely a massive plus to the Inmotion V11Y. But in the same time, the cable management could be better, because you have some slots where you put your cables before you put back your motherboard in place, and those slots are open, so you put 1, 2, 3 cables maybe in one section, and after, when you are trying to put them back, the cables have tendency to come off. So that's something that I don't like so much. I like that each one have a specific place to fit in, and after they can't move whatsoever from those places, and it's not really hard to make it. So Inmotion, if you are hearing and you are seeing this video, maybe on the V12 Pro or other wheels you can think about this subject. But if you are concerned about plugging those cables inside your wheel and you are not sure if this one goes here or this one goes there, that's not really a problem, because Inmotion do something that I really like, is that every single plug is different. So you always know that that one goes here and that one goes there, if it makes sense. Another thing that I really like on the Inmotion V11Y is the thickness of the rubbers around the cables are better. Like for example, it was easy to damage the cables of the motor because it was really thin and they were close to the suspension. Here they are much thicker, so definitely a plus. And that piece of plastic that now have more screws is also wider, so the amount of space that you have to put your cables is bigger, so you have less chances to damage your cables when you are trying to basically screw in and tight them inside that specific space. You may ask yourself, is it possible to replace the front light, for example, for a front light exactly the same that you find on the Inmotion V11Y, since it's much better And the answer is no, because if you want to do that, you also have to exchange your motherboard, you also have to exchange the case where the controller goes, and you have to also exchange the backlight, and obviously the cost for doing that will be much higher than obviously finding a light that is specifically for the Inmotion V11. When we talk about the suspension, I never really try to exchange to the suspension of the Inmotion V11Y, but the information that I have is it is slightly longer than the suspension that you find on the Inmotion V11, so you have also more costs to try to do these hybrid changes found on the Inmotion V11Y. Another thing that is a massive improvement on the Inmotion V11Y is the bearings, because when we look to the Inmotion V11, when it just came out, you had basically no bearing covers. So the water, the dust was going to the bearings, and after maybe 1,000 kilometers, you had to replace your bearings. And we know is the worst part to replace on a wheel, because you need to open the motor and it's super hard to reach there. When we talk about the second generation of the motor of the V11, you start having like a rubberized material that was covering in there, made by Inmotion, based on basically the 3D printed that we were basically installing ourselves on our Inmotion V11. So they've done this rubber, very good quality, but when we talk about rubber, the rubber can expand with the heat, and also it can dry and starts to get damaged, and in other words, you'll start having some water and dust going in. When we look to the Inmotion V11Y, what they've done is they've done some covers in metal, so the risk of damaging is less, so you have more probabilities to do more miles before you have to think about it changing your bearings on the Inmotion V11Y. When we talk about the charging ports on your wheel, here you have 5 amp ports and here you have 10 amps, so if you need to do a fast charging, you are in better hands if you buy the Inmotion V11Y. When we talk about safety, and this is a big one, because I was always concerned about charging my wheels at night. So what I've done, I use a charge enhancer from PitZoom, so definitely a plus. So you can do like not full charge, so you can do like, imagine a 83.7 volts charge, and once a month you do a 84 volts charging. So that's a massive plus, because when you reach that point, it just stops to charge. And another thing that I can say to you by experience, because I was the first one outside of China to receive the Inmotion V11Y, is the fact that this wheel, if it finds any problem, it will stop charging, it will stop doing things. And obviously we had, during this process of testing the wheel, they changed some hardware on the Inmotion V11Y, and after I had to wait for parts for it. So definitely I can say to you guys that the smart BMS on the Inmotion V11Y really works, and obviously that's an amazing benefit to have, because something that I'm really happy about this wheel is the fact to have that BMS, and allows me to sleep better at night, if it makes sense. When we talk about weight, I have to say that that's a massive selling point between these wheels. If you live in an apartment, if you have to put these wheels inside the car, definitely having a wheel around 30 kilos is possible to carry around. And when you go to wheels more powerful, like for example the Inmotion V14 that is coming really soon to the channel, that's not so easy to move it around or to put on the back of a car. But the difference of weight between these two wheels is not really relevant, because you have just half a kilo more on the Inmotion V11Y compared to the Inmotion V11. When we talk about the suspension, believe me, in 2020 was a massive selling point of the Inmotion V11, but now is one of the worst suspensions that you have on the market. When we look here, it is not the best suspension on the market, but for really the specific target of this wheel is more than enough. And I can say that this one, not really good, this suspension amazing. Is really night and day. So giving you my experience, when you have a V11 and you have to fill it up, is not a comfortable thing to do, because you have to take some screws here on the top to fill the rebound, and you have to fill from the bottom also. And in this case, because the plastic was basically breaking more often on the bottom, I had these extra pieces to protect more that section, more screws that I have to take it off. So screws on the top, screws on the bottom to start filling up my wheel. In this one, I haven't never put anything on the bottom. The plastics on the bottom, they are still fine. I still have to take those screws on the top, and I don't get it why they didn't have to change the design of it, so we didn't have to take also those screws on the go, if it makes sense. But the design continued to be the same, but the suspension is not the same. So they have definitely made better valves. The lubrication that is inside is much better, and I have to say that in 500 kilometers I never had to put any air whatsoever on this one, and it's still like on the first day. When we go here, that's not the same experience. So maybe every week or so, or 2 weeks maximum, you need to think to rectify your suspension because it's not performing at the same way. And even this one, even if you lose slightly, is not that you need to be so specific on the amount of air that you put on your rebound and on the bottom. Massive improvement if we talk about suspension on the Inmotion V11Y. When we talk about handles, they are exactly the same, so no changes whatsoever in there. The screws are still on the bottom, so all the same. When we talk about the front light, is not even a fight, because this front light always been super loud. I don't know if you guys can hear, but it's super loud. And yeah, for 2020, that front light was the best on the market. But when we look to this one, so much brighter. It's really bright, and also you can change the angle of it, so you can make it higher or lower, and that's something that you couldn't do with this one. And this one, since it's open on the front, you don't have any fan on the back, so it's always very silent. With this one, you don't need any extra lights. With this one, you definitely should have an extra light if you are really concerned about seeing what is happening in front of you. You can manage, but it's not at the same level as the Inmotion V11Y. When we talk about, obviously, the backlight, is exactly the same experience, so no changes whatsoever in there. When we talk about the tire, is not even comparable. On the Inmotion V11Y, I put a street tire, and this one is a Michelin City Extra with a profile 1970, and I put in rear configuration, because when you do that, you reduce the splashes of water going up, you have more nimbleness with this wheel, and also you will get more grip, so definitely a plus with this one. And when you go here, you have an off-road tire. But we'll talk a little bit further down this video why I'll definitely recommend you to stay away from off-road tires if you want to purchase the Inmotion V11Y, because I definitely believe that that's a massive mistake. When we talk about the mudguard, yes, there is a massive difference between the two. The materials is the same, very flexible, is very durable, but I have to say that the mudguard on the Inmotion V11Y is much better. But when we talk about dust going up, it will continue to go. When we talk about water, definitely a better design that you have on the Inmotion V11Y than you have on the Inmotion V11. When we talk about pedals, I have to say to you guys that this is not even a fight. The ones that comes with the V11 is remove them and throw them in the bin, buy something like the honeycomb pedals, and you'll be ready to go. When we go to the Inmotion V11Y, I have to say that that's a better approach, because these pedals are much bigger, but they have a problem. They don't have removable spikes. So for that, spend $10 and do some DIY, install some spikes on there, and you'll be ready to go with these ones. They are really cool. They have some cool designs that I showed on another video that I disassembled, so if you want to know that a little bit more in specific, definitely check that video. But on this one, you can't change the angle of your pedals, so that's definitely a downside, obviously, compared to other ones that you have to buy, and obviously they are never cheap. So when we talk about the pedal hanger, I have to say to you guys that is much better on the Inmotion V11Y than it is on the Inmotion V11, because this one was much higher. And for me, that I had an accident and I injured my knee, that's been a big problem for me to restart riding electric unicycle. So when I use the Inmotion V11, if I have a post or if I have a wall, I'll just try to put my hand on and jump on it. With the Inmotion V11Y, I don't need to do that, because I'm much closer to the floor. Not that I'm not able to jump, it's more painful for me at the minute, and hopefully I'll feel better in the next couple of months. But with this one, is very easy to jump on it, and also the weight distribution is so much better. So curving on this wheel is almost, I will say, similar to my experience riding my Inmotion V12 high speed, that is until now has been my favorite wheel of all times from Inmotion. And also, because you are closer to the floor, even if it's really windy, and unfortunately in the UK this year has been horrible, and it's very easy to feel the wind pushing you out of an Inmotion V11. With this one, for more wind that is you feel it, you don't feel that it's throwing you out. So definitely an amazing plus with the Inmotion V11Y. Another thing that I want just to point it out is acceleration and braking. And I have to say to you guys that is not even a fight, it's a massive difference. So if you have more powerful wheels, or if you test more powerful wheels and you have to jump again on the Inmotion V11, I have to say that it's really disappointing, because this wheel, the first meters is super slow. So if you tried a V12 high speed, or if you jump onto a Kingsong S22, or even the Master that I simply hated, was one of the wheels that I hated the most. Anyway, if we jump to the Inmotion V11Y, is night and day. And I have to say that the acceleration is similar to the Inmotion V12 high speed, but obviously you don't have the top end speeds that obviously that wheel can deliver. But I really like the response, and even if you have the split modes that you can obviously give a certain amount for your acceleration and a certain amount for your braking. And when we talk about this, I see a lot of you guys give 100 to accelerate, 100 to brake, and that basically is going to make your wheel stiff. So the way that I use is up to 100, you divide between the two. So I give 63 to the acceleration and 37 for the braking. So it's super easy to accelerate, and because when I brake, I basically kick to the side, it's very easy to brake with the Inmotion V11Y, also because your pedals are much closer to the floor, and in that way I feel really in control of what I'm doing with this wheel. But now let's talk about curving with these two wheels, and that's a massive difference once again. So when we look to the Inmotion V11, and that's the main reason why I put an off-road tire, when you try to do a curve, you really need to feel like it seems that it's almost that point that the wheel will just fall into the floor, if it makes sense. But when you go to the V11, why you don't need to do that? It's super easy to just give a small curve, and the wheel is super responsive. So because of that, I put an off-road tire here, so just to increase the amount of grip that I have towards the sides of my tire. But here I decided to go to an off-road tire because it's going to be more nimble and will help me to also be closer to the floor and being more aggressive and taking all the power from the Inmotion V11Y. And yes, don't put an off-road tire on the Inmotion V11Y, but I'll let you know why. Now let's talk about the suspension and the big difference between these two. And if you have a V11, you'll understand really well what I'm going to say. So first of all, when it came out, yes, it was relevant. It was the first wheel with suspension, but it's definitely not the best suspension in the world. But this one, if you are slightly off on the rebound or on the bottom, it gets really uncomfortable and even can be dangerous. When we go to the Inmotion V11Y, it's not even comparable. I tried the rebound with 150 psi, I tried the rebound with 100 psi, and yes, it makes it with 150, it gets stiffer than if I use 100, but I don't feel that the wheel, if I get a hole, it just throw me out of the wheel. And that's something that you feel with this one, is just like a massive hit under your feet. That's the reason why I say that this suspension, they feel completely different. This one, I have very weak, or every 2 weeks, you need to put some air to continue to maintain those type of level. In here, I've done 500 kilometers without changing the air, so definitely a plus. So yes, they have the same design, but are not even close to be similar to each other. Another thing that is important, really important for me, is waterproofing. And this is an IPX6, something that in 2020 you could never ask to have, because it seems that it was almost a taboo to talk about waterproofing. And now you can be sure that this wheel will continue to ride. But don't get me wrong, you'll get some dust going in next to your batteries, but because the batteries are basically isolated and also your control board is completely isolated from everything else, dust and water will never go in, so you are completely safe. But let's talk about why I said that I will never put an off-road tire on the V11Y. So when I put it in here, and this is really important to have in consideration, I'm comparing the range that I've done here 4 years ago to this one, and I'm not the same person. So at that time I used to be around 72 kilos, and now I'm about 80 kilos. So 8 kilos makes a lot of difference when we talk about range. Here with the original tire I made 60 kilometers, and with the off-road tire I basically lost about 10 kilometers. And when we look to the Inmotion V11, if you were putting an off-road tire with the amount of torque that you already have, you will just lose even more range, and that's basically the worst thing about the Inmotion V11Y, but it's not as bad as you may think. Another thing that I have to say that was much better on the Inmotion V11 is the fact that this one had the speaker. Yes, it didn't have Bluetooth, but it had the speaker, so the beepings were very, very loud compared to the Inmotion V11Y. And now you are laughing and saying, it's not loud enough. Believe me, with this one you don't hear anything. Range is always very related with safety, because when you start reaching the bottom of your battery, you are less safe. And since this wheel has so much features of safety, to know the temperatures of your battery, of your motors, etc., is much safer than this one. And when we talk about Inmotion always been a brand that is always really concerned about you, about the top speeds. And if you think about Inmotion in the past, they didn't wanted to do wheels faster than 40 kilometers per hour. So when they came out with the V13, that was like, wow, that's crazy for Inmotion. Or even the V12 reaching 70 kilometers per hour. That was not a normal approach from Inmotion. So we need to understand that yes, this wheel could go faster and could reach 60, but they don't really want to do that. And they advertise at 60 kilometers per hour, but to be honest, you feel comfortably at 55 kilometers per hour. When we talk about reaching the top speed on your wheel, your pedals, they react slightly, so you start feeling them. Here, because the beginning, you don't have a lot of torque, it feels like almost you can go faster, but it's not a real sensation, if it makes sense. Because this one, you have much more torque, so you reach that end much faster than the Inmotion V11. But there is another feature that I like about the Inmotion V11Y, is the fact that when you reach that and you feel slightly on your pedals, but it's very slightly. It's not like riding a Kingston wheel that you feel like a massive hit on your pedals. And with the Inmotion V11Y, that is something that I like, is when you are starting to accelerate and you reach that point, you have like a small light in red appearing next to your screen. So in that way, you are sure, okay, I reached that point that I need to consider that what I felt under my feet is because I reached that speed that I need to slow down slightly. So definitely a plus that you have with the Inmotion V11Y. But now let's talk about my experience riding with the Inmotion V11Y and the range that I could take out, and also the features of safety that you get with this one. So my first trip, fully charged, going to work, 13.6 kilometer, 24 minutes. No problem whatsoever, no pedal dipping, and obviously I didn't reach the 55 kilometers, 56, 57, so it's normal that I didn't felt my pedals doing this. I finished the work, I go back home, and I've done once again 13.6 kilometers. And at that point, after the first 20 kilometers, you start feeling more your pedals pushing you back. But funny fact, I reached a higher speed, so I reached 52.8. But anyway, the time that it took me to arrive home was exactly the same time. So it took me 24 minutes to go to work, and it took me 24 minutes to go back home. So even if I felt more that sensation, it didn't affect the overall time that takes me from my house to work and from work to home. After that, I've done another trip to basically pick up some dinner, and that was 8.5 kilometers. The maximum speed that I could reach at that specific point was 49.3. And if I put this based on the amount of kilometers that I take from work, so 13.6, the average time that will take me to do 13 kilometers at that specific point was once again very similar to the 24 minutes that took me to do the first 13.6 kilometers in the beginning of the battery, if it makes sense. At this point, I'm only with 24% of battery, and normally I recommend all of you guys and my friends to never ride their wheels under 30% of battery, because first of all, you reduce the life of your battery, and also it becomes more dangerous. But 24% on this wheel, I will show you that it is not really 24% of battery on other wheels like it was in the past. So at this point, I've done basically around 40 kilometers. And I will have to say to you guys, I will explain the rest of the range that I could make with the Inmotion V11, but usable, really usable, that you don't feel limited as much, is more or less 40 kilometers. But let me explain the end of this battery, because I was really impressed. Something that if you are a user of the Inmotion V11, you know that first 20% you have a sensation, the next 20% you have a different sensation, the other ones you have so on and so on. So you are always feeling that you are losing something, but you will understand by the speeds that I could take it, and we are already in 24%, you'll notice that this wheel is quite significant when we talk about safety and how fast you still can ride your Inmotion V11Y with such a low amount of battery. But before I show you the end experience that I had with this battery, I want to explain you the reasons why I will definitely recommend you to purchase a new Inmotion V11Y than staying with the Inmotion V11 or purchasing in second-hand the V11, or if you have one, why I believe that will be an advantage for you to replace your V11 for a V11Y. So obviously range is not that. If you are searching for more speed, also this wheel will not be the wheel for you. But if you are looking to V11 in steroids, definitely will be an advantage. But the big reason why I'll definitely recommend you to upgrade is, even if they are very similar in many different parts, if you have, for example, a problem on your motherboard, you'll have to change the motherboard, the case for the motherboard, the front light, the back light. So yes, parts are similar, but you have to replace more than once to be able to continue to use your Inmotion V11. So V11Y, in the long run, I think you'll be spending less money than if you continue to maintain your Inmotion V11. At this point, I think you have the question about, should you consider to sacrifice your range? And I have to say to you guys that if you think that you can do 40 kilometers without any limitations, and we'll talk about the rest, what was my total range in a minute, but 40 kilometers without any limitations, or almost any limitations, if you respect the limits of your wheel, obviously. I'm not saying that I will try to ride this at 70 kilometers per hour like I do in other wheels, but 40, it means that even if you want to stop in the middle to put to charge, so you go to work, you put to charge, you can do other 40 kilometers without almost any limitations, up to 50 kilometers per hour, let's say like this. So that's quite considerable. 50 kilometers per hour or 80 kilometers if you have to stop in the middle just to put to charge, and once again you have fast charger in this one, so I don't think that is a bad deal. Another thing also to consider when you look to the Inmotion V11 or the Inmotion V11Y is, with this kind of profile that is super slim and also light. Yes, I know, if we talk in 2020 saying that 30 kilos was light, was not, because I still remember my MSP that was 26 and I had wheels of 23 kilos and 18 kilos. Yes, definitely that's a different beast. But if you want more speed from Inmotion, you need to go to a Inmotion V14, but for that you have increased 10 kilos, and if you have to put this on the back of your car, you need to put this inside the locker, it starts to become a bit more uncomfortable. Or the worst case scenario, if you have to take this up the stairs, and this wheel is not like a 20-inch or 22-inch that is easier to just push to go up the stairs, definitely something to consider about. But let's continue to talk about the end of the battery and what I could accomplish. So from 24%, that is where we stop, until 17%, I managed to do 2.7 kilometers more at the speed of 44 kilometers. So basically, I've lost about 5 kilometers per hour during this 7% of battery. When I reached 14% of battery, the top speed was reduced to 38 kilometers per hour, and I managed to do 1.5 kilometers more. When you reach 13% until 12%, you are only able to do about half a kilometer, and my speed passed from 38 to 25 kilometers per hour. From that point up to 8 kilometers per hour, I lost 3 kilometers per hour more, so maximum speed 22 kilometers, and I managed to do other 2.5 kilometers. At 7% of battery, I lost other 2 kilometers per hour, so only 20 kilometers per hour, and I managed during that 1% to make another 1.3 kilometers. And at 6, it starts to get really hard, so you lose another 5 kilometers per hour, so only 15 kilometers per hour, and I only managed to take another half of a kilometer. When you reach 5%, it's time to say goodbye to your Inmotion V11Y and start to walk, because at that point you don't have battery to ride again. So in the end, I managed to take out 46.7 kilometers of range with this wheel. If we think about not feeling limited, 40 kilometers and another 6.7 kilometers more to still be able to go home like in an emergency. So have in mind that I'm about 80 kilograms, it was raining, The roads, they were quite good, so obviously if your roads are much worse, that can really impact. Milton Keynes is really flat, so if you have to do more mountains, obviously your range will be different. So have all of that in consideration. And obviously, if you are lighter weight than me, if you ride much slower than me, maybe you live in France and you just go up to 25 kilometers per hour, you'll have much more range with this one. So now that you understand the range that you can take out, and knowing that putting an off-road made me lose about 10 kilometers of range on the Inmotion V11, I will never put an off-road tire on the Inmotion V11Y, because I really feel that this wheel is never made for off-road. I put an off-road tire on this one because of the situation of how was the sensation when you are curving, because the pedals are so high, so I felt safer doing that to my Inmotion V11. But on the Inmotion V11Y, I don't feel that I have the need to do it, and because I use it in the city, is more than enough to use a street tire. So now that we are reaching the end of this video, I have to say that you should always consider to recharge your wheel above 30%, but if you can't, I'll say that up to 24% you are safe, because the wheel have almost any limitations whatsoever, and you are still able to do 40 kilometers. So if you have to stop in the middle, we are going to say that you can do easily 80 kilometers with the Inmotion V11Y, and if you are more calm and you ride a little bit slower than me, definitely you can easily maybe reach 100 kilometers with your Inmotion V11Y. But if you need to really push to the boundaries and reaching the edge of this wheel, we are talking about a full range of 92 if you charge in the middle of the day. But now you may ask yourself, should you purchase this one or not? Is it for a new starter or for an experienced rider? I'll say that is for both. But for a new starter, you need to be very careful, because this wheel doesn't really like to be beating up. Really protect as much as you can the front light and the back light until you learn to ride, and after understand that this wheel is not made to take it off-road, is to really take care as if it was a motorcycle. And for someone that is experienced riding electric unicycle like me, that I have over 40,000 kilometers on my legs, I have to say to you guys that I love to ride this one. It's such a lovely wheel. Yes, it's not a super fast, but there are many moments that I will not swap the V11Y for any other wheels on the market, because it's compact, it fits behind the seat of my wife, it fits inside the locker at work, or in this case not at work but at the gym, and that's definitely a massive plus. And I think that the overall experience that you have a wheel that do 55 kilometers per hour and have 30 kilos is almost unbeatable. And for the quality with the waterproofing and all those features, definitely a must-have. And in the long run, you know that is a wheel that Inmotion will continue to provide you parts, something that big God doesn't know how to make it. My name is Marco, this is MADpack. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, comment below, smash the thumbs up, do whatever you want, but always with a smile on your face, and I hope to see you in the next one.